to Zoom In, Zoom Out, your global look at news from Taiwan. I'm Jeremy Olivier. The 2024 Summer Olympics is now underway in Paris, and Taiwan has fielded 60 of its top athletes to compete. Today we're taking a look back at some of the history of Taiwan's participation in this event through a new documentary on TaiwanPlus. Decathlon, the CK Yang and Rafer Johnson Story, is about the unlikely but enduring friendship between two athletes from opposite ends of the world, as well as the joys and hardships they experienced in their extraordinary careers. To learn more about Yang and Johnson and the legacies they've left behind, I'm joined today by Decathlon's producer and one of its narrators, former CNN reporter Mike Chinoy. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So I first want to zoom in on just how this film came to be. And I want to start off by asking, what drew you to the story in the first place?
Well, it's a long story. It began when my co-writer, John Critch, was working as a correspondent for the Asian Wall Street Journal. And in 2006, he was working on a series about Asian Olympic legends in the run-up to the Beijing Games. He had been in Rome in 1960 as a kid with his family, and he vaguely remembered the name C.K. Yang. And so he was curious. He wondered, after all of these decades, whatever happened to C.K. Yang, and he managed to track C.K. down at the National Sports Training Center in Kaohsiung. He met him, they got to be friends, and he recorded several hours of interviews. He wrote his article, and then the following year C.K. died. And after that, John and I had talked about there must be something we can do with this wonderful material, but for a variety of reasons it took a very long time, during which I got to know Rafer Johnson. And it's such a compelling story that it just drew me in. Here you have these two guys from opposite sides of the world who would, under normal circumstances, have never met. And not only did they meet, and not only did their duel in the 1960 Rome Olympics become one of the iconic moments, and remains one of the iconic moments in Olympic history, but unknown to most people, throughout this period, they were the best of friends.
So you talked about the long-term nature of this project. Around how long did it take to get the documentary made, and what were some of the challenges you faced along the way?
Well, we started for real in 2019. We enlisted a terrific director, Frank W. Chen Wei-yang, whose previous film, Late Life, the Wang Jianming story, is a wonderful film about the Taiwanese baseball player Wang Jianming, who was a star pitcher for the New York Yankees until his career was cut short by injury. And Frank immediately got the idea of the story. So we began work on it, and then COVID came along, and that messed everything up because it meant that it was not possible to come to Taiwan unless you actually had a work visa. But we persevered. It took a tremendous amount of digging. I mean, this is all stuff that happened over half a century ago. So we had to go through film archives, we had to go through document archives, we had to find old photos. We were very lucky. The Johnson family gave us all of their home videos, which were a remarkable resource. We had to track down other pictures and moving images. We had to license them. We went through multiple drafts trying to figure out the best way to tell it in a way that shared the Rafer and CK story but made it contemporary. So it was a very long, hard slog to produce what is now on the air.
One of the most striking things about the documentary to me were the wonderful animations that were used to illustrate throughout it. But from what I understand, that wasn't the production's first choice. So can you tell me a little bit about how you came to make that stylistic direction?
One of the challenges, frankly, is that the cost of licensing Olympic video is extremely high. And there isn't all that much. There are just the events, but it's all kind of grainy old footage. And we thought that to kind of convey the power of the experience of these two athletes competing, that it would be more effective and more visually interesting to use illustrations and animations. So we hooked up with a terrific animator named Da Seung, who lives in Canada, and they did these wonderful animations that I think really lift the film to a different level and make it not just grainy old video and old guys doing sound bites. It gives it a special quality.
Despite that, you were still able to use the most memorable piece of media of Yang and Johnson's friendship, that iconic photo of them at the 1960 Rome Olympics. Johnson's arm around Yang, his chin on his shoulder. Can you just talk a little bit about that photo and its significance?
Well, this was and remains one of the great iconic sports photos of all time. The Decathlon in Rome in 1960 was a very tight contest. The lead went back and forth, and it came down to the final few seconds of the final event. The way the decathlon is scored, you get points for each event. So it's not whether you win the event, it's by how much you win the event. So in terms of the point calculation, Johnson got the gold and Yang got the silver. But at the end of the race, the two collapsed in each other's arms and somebody snapped a photo of it. And it so exemplifies what was special about these two guys. And in the film, Johnson talks about as happy as he was that he won the gold, he felt bad for his best friend who didn't win. And CK had the same reaction. As sad as he was that he didn't win and he only got silver, he was so happy that it was Rafer who got the gold. And the photo really exemplifies the friendship that was at the core of their relationship, and that's at the center of the film.
Mike, we're going to zoom out now and take a look at some of the broader issues that the film touched on, including the fraught politics around Taiwan's participation in the Games. And that includes how Taiwan must name itself in order to compete. We'll return to our conversation in the studio in just a minute, but first let's dig deeper into how this name, which is now Chinese Taipei, affects Taiwan's athletes and its people, with this report from John Van Trieste.
On the sidelines of the Paris Olympics, words that could have caused trouble if they'd been spoken at any of the official venues. Under a 1981 agreement, Taiwan's national team is barred from using the national flag or anthem at the Games, and they must compete under the name Chinese Taipei. China says Taiwan is its rightful territory and does not tolerate anything, even a name, that could imply otherwise. But for the second Summer Games in a row, a local anchor in the host city has explained to viewers watching the opening ceremony that Chinese Taipei is Taiwan. At first, Taiwanese sports fans in Paris couldn't believe it.
我就听到台湾，然后我就很开心，然后我想说会不会听错，我就倒回去重新看了一次，这个真的是台湾，我也分享给我在台湾的朋友，然后我们都很开心。
Athletes themselves are wary about weighing in. Just bringing Taiwan's flag to an international sporting event can be grounds for disqualification, as Taiwan's first ever male Olympic gold medalist explains.
那当我们如果放弃了名称或者是更换名称，他们就有机会就觉得你违规了，这个我觉得是一个非常大的风险。那如果我们真的被抵制了，我们如果真的不能参加了，那我们这些选手怎么办？
You can watch the full report on the TaiwanPlus website. Now, back to our conversation with you, Mike. So the year that Yang competed in Rome was also coincidentally the first year that Taiwan was forced to compete under a different name. But at that time, it wasn't a matter of Chinese Taipei versus Taiwan, was it?
No, what happened in 1960 was very interesting. And we deal with it at length in the film. The International Olympic Committee was trying very hard to get the Chinese Communists to send a team. And so in order to lure them, they said to Taiwan, you can participate, but you can't call yourself the Zhonghua Mingguo, the Republic of China. You have to just be Taiwan. And Chiang Kai-shek, the ruler of Taiwan, was so angry at this that he almost considered ordering the team to boycott the Games. And the only reason that he didn't was because he calculated that CK Yang, by winning a medal, could bring glory to Taiwan and sort of help score points in this endless struggle with Beijing. So that was one of the intense pressures that Yang faced. But interestingly, it wasn't the only one, because at that point, no person with a Chinese surname had ever won an Olympic medal. So Yang carried this double pressure. But in the end, Chiang Kai-shek said, okay, you can participate, and Yang did win the medal. But at the opening ceremony, the Taiwan team marched in and they carry a placard that says "Under Protest," and they marched past where the head of the IOC was sitting. And it was the first overt political protest by a team in Olympic history. And it just goes to show that even 64 years ago, this issue of how Taiwan was going to call itself in order to be able to participate in the Games was a very fraught one. So this shadow of the Taiwan-China battle loomed over CK's sporting life in very important ways.
Decathlon also gave quite a bit of insight into the racial dimension of Yang and Johnson's friendship. Both men were from marginalized communities. Yang, who is indigenous Samis, spoke of being treated as a third-class citizen in his own country. How did that inform his connection with Johnson, as well as his time living and training in the US?
CK Yang was aware, obviously, that he was Amis, but he wasn't a kind of Amis activist. That wasn't the way things were done back then. But at the same time, when he went to the States in 1958 to train at UCLA with Johnson under their wonderful coach that they shared with the great name of Ducky Drake, he was naively unaware of all the racial tensions in the States. But CK Yang in the film talks about going to a track meet in New Orleans, and a teammate, also of color, said to him when they got on the bus, "You know, here, all colored people have to sit in the back of the bus, and you're a person of color and I'm a person of color, so we have to join the black people sitting in the back of the bus." And CK said that was an absolute revelation to him because he was, in a sense, colorblind. It made no difference to him what color anybody was. And part of what's interesting is that the way that affected his friendship and relationship with Johnson, he was kind of absorbed into the Johnson family. Rafer would bring him home. His mom would cook up these big Southern meals. The family came from Texas originally. It was the first time CK ever eaten black-eyed peas and other soul food and so on. And he just, absorbed all of that, embraced it. It was just it was a non-issue. He didn't judge people by how they looked. And that, I think, is one of the wonderful qualities about him. And frankly, it's one of the wonderful qualities about Rafer as well.
Something that the film did stress was the contrasting legacies that these two men have left behind in their home countries. Johnson achieved a measure of fame and recognition that lived on beyond his death. But the same can't necessarily be said of Yang. Why is that?
It's hard to say, but I think it's true. At UCLA, they named the running track stadium after Rafer Johnson. There was a big exhibition in his honor in Los Angeles a few years ago. When he died, it was on the national news. It was in every major newspaper and so on. Somehow CK Yang has been forgotten here. The government gave him a house in Taitung, which is known as the Iron Man House, as a reward after his achievements in 1960. But the house is now run down. Nobody lives in it. There's no museum in his honor. There's a fourth floor, generally locked room at the National Olympic Training Center in Kaohsiung. There's a collection of CK memorabilia, statues and posters and so on. But it's not easily accessible to the public. And one of our hopes with this film is to share the story of CK Yang with a new generation here, because there's so much that you can learn about sports, about courage, and above all about friendship that endures beyond these two men's own lives from looking at what they experienced. And hopefully that will make people remember CK in a way that he deserves to be remembered.
Yeah, I hope so too. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mike, and sharing your experiences with this documentary.
I'm very glad to be here. Thanks.
Decathlon, the CK Yang and Rafer Johnson story, is now streaming on the TaiwanPlus website and social media, where you can watch it and other programs from TaiwanPlus. This has been Zoom In, Zoom Out. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.